Lydia Frank here from PayScale. She is the Vice President of Content, so she manages all the content for their business customers as well as their consumer services. And PayScale is a compensation and software company.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let Lydia talk a little bit more about that. She's going to talk with you about how to negotiate for what you're worth. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. So yeah, I'm going to kind of jump right in here. I've been with PayScale for about 9 years. We've been around for about 15. And we collect salary data from individual workers who come and fill out a salary survey, tell us what they're making currently for their role, give us a lot of details about their job, so that when somebody comes in after them and wants to know how much a certain job pays, that we have a good set of data to say, here's the typical range for a given position. We also use that data to sell to employers. So we have about 5,000 businesses who use our data to set pay as well, to understand what to pay for a given position. I'm going to talk today about kind of why salary negotiation matters, why, whether you're negotiating a first job, which many of you would be doing, or, future kind of further on in your career, if you'd be negotiating a raise, for example, how to do that, what to think about, how to just understand the mechanics of how an employer approaches that discussion, how you should approach that discussion, and really talk about the impact it can have. And I think a lot of times coming out of college, I know I felt this way, when you're graduating, you don't think you have a lot of leverage. You think, oh, I'm a dime a dozen, I don't have any experience, like I just have to take what they offer, right? Not true, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is. Let's jump in here. So, if I can do anything today, it would be to let all of you know that if you've not figured out completely what you want to do for a living, that is 100% okay. If you nail it right out of college, you're a miracle. I think a lot of people spend a lot of their career trying to figure out the kind of sweet spot between these things here. You want to find something that you love to do, something that the world needs done, right? Something that you're good at, and that's something that somebody will actually pay you to do. If you can find all of those things together, that's fantastic. Sometimes it's a combination of those things, but you're looking for kind of all of that together. And I'm really here to talk about the fact that whatever you end up doing for your career, there's a value for that job, and it's okay, even if you are doing something mission-driven, it is okay also to get paid fairly for that position, and it's just good for everybody to understand really what their worth is in the job market. So if this sets your mind at ease at all, most people don't actually know whether they're paid fairly, whether they're right out of school or whether they're 10 years into their career or 20 years into their career. When we ask people whether they were paid below market, at market, above market, and at market, this term essentially is like, what will the current job market pay a given position? And we basically are asking users, do you think you're at relatively kind of the worth for this job, or do you think you're making more than most people would make for this job or less than people would make for this job? Most people guess wrong. So people who are actually paid at market, 64% of them believe that they're paid below market. For people who are paid above market, are making more than most people would make for this role, 35% believe they're paid below market, 45% believe they're paid at market, only 21% get it right. So it's complicated, right? It's not easy. Part of the reason for that is it changes all the time. The value of a position really fluctuates based on a lot of different factors, kind of what's going on with the business, what's going on with the industry, what's happening with the economy. Part of it is kind of the flow of graduates coming out of schools is, there a shortage of new graduates in a given field, and so there's more jobs than there are grads to fill it, or are there more grads than there are jobs? Essentially, like, which way is that going? And that absolutely will impact kind of what companies are paying for a given position. So, you know, you get mixed messages too. You hear a lot of people telling you to absolutely negotiate your salary always. And then you have people, this is the CEO of Microsoft, who said, oh, don't really worry about asking for a raise. Just have faith that the system will give you the right raise. How often does that work out? That people will just do the right thing. And even if employers want to do the right thing, you know, there's lots of things going on, lots of things they need to be paying attention to. And if you're not a little bit of the squeaky wheel on your own behalf, things could get overlooked, you know. And the other thing to know is, or think about, is you have a better sense of what you've accomplished recently in your role, and what value you bring to the organization, than somebody in the human resources department, sometimes even more so than your boss. And you need to be kind of the person that's drawing attention to the value that you're bringing. So one stat that I would have you keep in mind, which is super interesting, is from this study. You'll see here the source at the bottom, who asks and who receives in salary negotiation. When they looked at young people who negotiated or didn't negotiate for kind of a first offer, employees who negotiated their salary, like an offer from an employer, typically could boost their annual pay an average of $5,000. So you're getting a first offer, whether it's $45,000 a year or $70,000, depending on what the job is. If you just ask for a little bit more, most people could get a bump, small bump. You know, $5,000 doesn't seem like a huge amount. It may seem like a huge amount right now, but it may not seem worth kind of bickering over, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I really want to push it. But you know, if you take that extra step and you ask for a little bit more respectfully, a 25-year-old who negotiated a starting salary of $55,000, for example, versus $50,000, will earn $634,000 more over the course of their career. That's huge. That's a house. That's a yacht, you know, like whatever. It's retirement. That's a huge figure. And I think it's important to remember that even if the number, like a small increase, seems small, annually, that's going to add up over time. And it's worth, you know, asking for that little bit more. So talking about pay, regardless of your age, regardless of what your job is, regardless of anything, it's awkward, right? It's not something that's easy to bring up. Most people don't want to reveal what they make, not even to their family or their friends. It's changing a little bit. Typically, younger generations are more willing to kind of share that information, but people feel differently about it, you know? And so it's even awkward to figure out, like, who can I ask, who would be willing to share with me, who wouldn't. There was a Twitter campaign a while ago, hashtag #TalkPay, where people were posting their salaries. But comparatively to all the people that are working in the US, that was a very small percentage of people who were actually putting their pay up on Twitter. So, you know, it's like, how do you actually get to this information? That's really why the company I work for, PayScale, started in the first place. The idea being that salary shouldn't be a secret, it shouldn't be difficult information to get. And when our founder, you know, started his little startup in a garage, the idea was everybody should know this data, right? Why isn't this easily accessible? And the employer who's negotiating on behalf of the company, you know, HR, whomever it is, a manager, shouldn't be the only one that understands what the value of that position is. You on the other side of the table should also know that. So today, you know, back when we started, we had to work up to getting some data. Now we have 54 million people who've completed the survey, told us about their salary, about 5,000 business customers who use it. This is kind of what it looks like when you go through and take a survey on PayScale. you're essentially looking at, this just give you an idea of kind of what we do, but you know, looking at a salary for your current job, you can look at a salary for a job offer that you've actually gotten to compare it, or research a job that isn't your own. You're just kind of playing around, trying to understand jobs. And at the end of the survey, you get this free salary report, which essentially says, here's the range for the position. If you know your current salary, if it's an offer or you have a job, it will tell you where you fall within the range. If you don't have an offer or a job and you're researching, it will just give you the range. Excuse me, I'm going to take a little bit of this water. For employers, we have a set of software where they're using the same type of data, but they're coming at it from a slightly different angle of trying to price jobs. You know, often they're looking at different geographies, different industries. They're trying to get the freshest data available, identify which of their employees might be looking to leave because they're maybe not being paid well comparatively to market, because that market is always changing. So companies are trying to kind of stay on top of it on the other side. So let's get into the heart of this. Pay is an emotional topic, right? It's tied to a sense of worth. It represents your ability to really support yourself, your family. It can mean the difference between scraping by, eating top ramen, and living comfortably and going out with your friends. They're also scary, right? It's not something, even people that have been out of college for a long period of time and are working, it is terrifying every time, right? To have this discussion, even if you really feel confident, it's just not comfortable, right? So the thing that I like to remind people of, and some data that we pulled recently, occasionally we'll add questions to our survey to get a little bit of a pulse on how people are feeling about things. And we asked people whether they had negotiated a raise in their current role, and if they hadn't, kind of why not. What we found was that only 43%, so less than half of people had asked for a raise, but if they had asked, 75% got one. So to me, that's very much, it's worth it, a stat there. And sometimes they didn't necessarily get the full amount they asked for, but they got something. So, you know, that's pretty good odds. If you are willing to stick your neck out a little bit, do the hard work of bringing up the topic, having the conversation, or in a, you know, first negotiation, pushing a little bit to see if there's wiggle room on the offer, 3/4 of people are going to get something, right? So it's worth having the conversation. So for people who don't ask, a large portion said they were just happy with the salary that they got. Great. 27% said they were uncomfortable. Not surprising. It's kind of a common feeling. 19% said they didn't want to be perceived as pushy. Something I would say around that is typically your employer is going to expect you to negotiate. If you don't, it's surprising. So kind of don't let them off the hook. It's okay, you know, to say, hey, oh, okay, you offered me 50 grand for this position. That's a great offer. Thank you so much. I was wondering, you know, I've done my research. I would like to understand a little bit more about whether there's some wiggle room there, because the number I was thinking about was a bit higher. Can we come to something, you know, some common compromise there? And most people are going to say, like, especially if you're being respectful, reasonable, you've done your homework, you have a sense of the range, they're going to welcome that conversation. It's not going to be something that they're upset about. 8% said they were worried about losing their job. Again, you know, unless you're working for a company that maybe you shouldn't be working for anyway, if you're that terrified of losing your job by bringing up the conversation around pay, you know, it's typically not something that's going to get you canned. So does anybody know what this is? I don't know if this is like my generation. You totally don't know what it is. It's fine. It's fine. It used to be on TV. Never mind. Anyway, so understanding the factors around salary negotiation, I think put you far ahead of kind of the game. A few things to note here. So the labor market. Employers are essentially looking at what they need to pay for a given position in a city, but it's more than geography. So a labor market is kind of like, who are they competing with for talent? Who are the other employers who are hiring people in that same role, in their same city, in a similar industry, similar company size? Like, who are they trying to kind of draw talent from, and vice versa? That's essentially the labor market. Purple squirrel, so this cute little guy, Esteban Chestnut is his name, is our mascot at PayScale. But the reason why is that in the HR community, there's this concept of purple squirrel, which, as you would imagine, is hard to find in nature. The idea is that there are often employees that are hard to find in the labor market, right? People with a certain skill set or combination of skills that are difficult to find. If you have identified that you're in a pretty hot kind of job area, and you have a certain set of skills that are not common, that's great. You know, you have a little bit more leverage than the average squirrel. So it's just something to understand about yourself. Like, are you unique, or are there a lot of people like you? And if there are a lot of people like you, how do you differentiate yourself in that market? Is there something more you could do to kind of acquire a set of skills that is unique? Or how do you kind of set yourself apart? Maybe it's an internship, you know, what have you. So industry wage trends is other things. So understanding in the greater context for your employer, how are wages doing in that given industry? It's just good to kind of lift your head up and say, outside of this one-on-one negotiation between me and this employer, are they feeling pain right now? Is the industry doing well, not doing well? With the current economy, is that going to impact anything positively or negatively for this employer? So are they feeling a little bit flush and maybe more willing to negotiate? Are they feeling like tightening the purse strings because they're nervous about something? And I think just trying to understand the context in which you're negotiating is great, because it just gives you a little bit of additional information. Like, any of that is just data that you can take in before you walk in and sit down at a negotiation table. The other thing to understand is when you're thinking about what you're worth and all the skills that you bring to the table, you're pricing yourself, right? You're trying to understand, what am I worth in the job market? An employer is pricing a position. They've decided, okay, I want to hire whatever it is, a teacher, or I want to hire a software developer, or I want to hire an office manager. And given that, I've come up with a job description of what my ideal employee is. They have this much experience, they have this education level, they have this skill set. You may bring more to the table than they have outlined, and having a conversation about what additional value you're bringing and why they might want to readjust what they were planning to pay that position is an okay conversation to have. But it's also good to know that they started with a framework in mind. And so, you know, they're just coming at it from a slightly different viewpoint than you are. Also, I think this is really good to understand. It wasn't something I fully understood, honestly, until I started working for PayScale, and I was well into my career before that happened. Was the idea of, like, what is the kind of breakdown of a pay range? So many companies set kind of pay bands for given positions. And so let's say, you know, whatever your job is, this is a really low one, but let's say the range for the position that the company has determined is we're willing to pay this person $20,000 to $32,000 a year, somewhere within that range. So the midpoint of the range is just, you know, what's the middle, like what's the median there? typically, employers are looking at this as if you're making in the middle of the range, you're at full competency for the role. You're doing everything you possibly could do in the role. You're not a junior employee that's kind of ramping. So often they might bring you in kind of lower in the range if you're junior, with the idea that you'd move toward full competency as you gain skills. And then as the longer you're there, the more kind of experience you have, all those, the skill sets you're developing, you may get into this upper part of the range. But the expectation would be you're kind of a more senior employee in that range. And when you're starting to get to the top, that's when you want to start having conversations around what's my next step. Like, I'm going to top out, and there's a certain point at which it doesn't make sense for the company to pay you anymore to do this role because it doesn't bring any more value to the company. But it may make sense for them to put you into a slightly more senior role that has a different pay range, right? And so it's just understanding that at some point you will top out at any job in terms of how much they can pay you to do that job. So always understanding kind of what the next step is for you once you get toward the top of a range is important. It's good to do some pre-planning and understand like what would my kind of path here be. So I'm going to get into some kind of tactical advice here. Knowing your worth is a big one. Obviously, it's very much the premise that PayScale is based around, but essentially doing your homework. You can do that at PayScale. You can do it at other sites that exist. Glassdoor has some salary data, salary.com, Bureau of Labor Statistics. There's different data sources out there. But essentially, do your homework, make sure you have a really good sense of what the range is for a position so that you're not walking into a negotiation uninformed. Because the other person in that room is going to have a very good sense of what they want to pay you. But if you don't have a sense of whether that is a fair offer, you're at a disadvantage. So I would say just get really solid on what is a good range for this position. And also remember, it's not one number, right? It is a range. So have a sense of what is the bottom of the range that I'm willing to accept, and like what's my ideal, and what's a crazy number that I probably shouldn't throw out there. This has been kind of a point of contention recently, is this idea of whether to provide salary history or not. Many employers will ask you for it, and our position at PayScale has very much been, and my position personally has been, that it shouldn't matter, that it's not really anybody's business except yours, what you made previously, because the employer should be pricing the job based on the value of that position to their organization. They shouldn't be basing it off what you personally previously made, because what if somebody underpaid you in your last job? That shouldn't follow you the rest of your life. What's difficult, especially when you're first looking for jobs, too, is that sometimes there's online applications where they will ask for that information. You have to put something in there, so go ahead and put something. In your guys' case, maybe you don't have any history. But what I would say is, whatever number you end up putting in salary history, I think it's okay to talk to an employer about, hey, I put this history number in there, but that isn't necessarily my expectation. That I've done my research around this role, and I think what I made previously doesn't really have any bearing on this, So it's okay to kind of just quickly dismiss what you may have put in an online application. And the best employers are not going to try to lowball you, right? But there does tend to be a little bit of kind of, math that goes in there in terms of how, I want to pay them fairly, but I also want to save the company money. So there is some kind of stuff that goes on in the background that you just don't want your past history to be influencing that. The other thing to remember is that, you can negotiate beyond a paycheck. So Base salary is certainly important. As we talked about before, it can certainly add up over time, especially if you were able to increase your base salary a certain amount. You're going to continue to get that every year, right? So that's a big win. But there are other pieces of a total compensation package, and that includes things beyond base pay, variable pay. So sometimes there's bonuses involved, whether it's a spot bonus, like a signing bonus, or which is okay, but honestly, anything that doesn't repeat isn't really awesome, right? I'd much more encourage you to negotiate an annual bonus that is tied to some metric to say, hey, you know, maybe you're not willing to negotiate on base pay, like if they've already said no to that, would you be willing to talk about a bonus where if I can hit certain numbers that would bring additional value to the company, that then I would get the bonus, essentially. And more companies these days are willing to negotiate around variable pay versus base, because base they're always going to have to pay out, right, regardless of how you're performing. But a bonus is based on your performance. So as long as you're confident in your ability to kill it, then that's, you know, it's okay that it's not necessarily going to be a guaranteed paycheck. And especially if, you know, if you're getting kind of the stonewalled on the base pay aspect of it, it's kind of like, where else can I go with this? The other things to think about are kind of benefits and what's important to you. So, you know, paid time off, vacation, whether flexibility is important to you. If they're not willing to negotiate around pay, could you negotiate something around your schedule? Could you negotiate something around working from home one day a week? You know, there's, depending on what the role is, obviously, if you're an elementary school teacher, not working from home one day a week, probably, if you have to be in the classroom. But it is important to think about what are the things that are of value to you beyond money, and that the employer, too, might be willing to move a little bit on. The other thing I would say, just as we were talking about before in terms of understanding kind of external factors that might be impacting the company, whether that's the current economy, whether that is kind of what's happening in an industry, or what have you, picking your timing for asking, if in this case it's a pay increase, or even if you're negotiating a first offer, understanding kind of the current climate is going to help you make good choices around like how much you're pushing, you know, how much you're asking for, all these things. I would say once you're in a role, especially trying to think about if you just did something really awesome for the company and brought in some great client or added some value to the organization, or the company just had a big win. You know, it's like, think about when you're going and knocking on somebody's door and asking for an increase. If the company just went through something, some downsizing or something, and they just laid off a bunch of people, you probably don't want to make your salary request at that time. So it's really just being cognizant of kind of what's happening around you. You know, and it really plays into, you guys have probably heard this concept of emotional intelligence, but it really is that, right? It's, if you're being a little bit tone deaf around kind of what's happening with the company, your boss is probably going to look at you like, are you serious right now? If you ask at a time that just feels really off in terms of what's happening with the business. So the other thing I would say is practice makes perfect. So it's not something, you know, negotiation isn't something that most of us do every single day, especially pay negotiations. And whether you have prepared a lot or not, like walking into that room, there are just like physical things that happen to your body, right? Adrenaline starts going, you might start turning red, you can have like your hands start shaking a little bit. Like it depends kind of on your level of nervousness around this topic. But the more prepared you are, the more confident you are going to be walking into this situation. And even if your body is betraying you a little bit and maybe your voice is squeaking or things are happening in a way that you wish they weren't. If you are feeling confident about what you have to say, you are more easily going to be able to put that stuff aside and get past it. So I would say thinking about, practicing these conversations. You can do role playing with a friend, a parent, a sibling, what have you. The other thing I would recommend is there are some sites where you can go on, or you could even just do this yourself. Like, it's embarrassing, but it will help you, is record yourself, right? Like, record yourself asking for a raise and having this conversation and making the justification for why this person should give you more money, and then play it back for yourself. All of us, regardless of who you are, probably aren't going to be happy with the first take, right? You're going to say, or you're going to stumble, or you're not going to have phrased it exactly how you wanted to or you meant to. So I think, that idea of like, can I do this repeatedly and get to a place where I feel like this is really strong, so that I'm going from kind of almost muscle memory when I go in to have the conversation. And that's, same thing as like if you're doing a presentation or anything else, it's just getting into that habit. So a few resources I would mention. We do, in addition to the survey on PayScale, we have a salary negotiation guide. We actually just did a refresh of it, I want to say last week, but there's a ton of articles. It's all free. There actually is a path for if you're negotiating for the first time. So there's lots of good resources in there. This site, Big Interview, is an example of a site where you could go on and do video practice interviews. It's kind of interesting. Like, they have essentially scenarios that you can play where they have a practice interviewer asking you questions, and then you record yourself with the laptop camera or whatever giving answers, and then you can like play it back for yourself. And I think they have some other services where maybe they coach you through it. The Muse is specifically a career site, kind of more targeted to millennials, probably also Gen Z now, I would imagine. But it provides kind of an inside look at companies. Glassdoor has some of that information as well, but essentially getting the sense of, if you're walking into an interview, can you get a better sense of what it's like to work there? And that's really what these sites tell you, is people that actually are employees there, what do they say about working there? On Glassdoor as well, I know they have sample interview questions, which can be helpful, to practice with interview questions that have actually been asked in real interviews at that company. Excuse me. Fairy Godboss is one that's specifically for women. It's actually kind of like Glassdoor, but it's for women by women. Like, it's just kind of a female-friendly place to work. The one last thing I would leave you with before we get into this is, we do some data, and I do a lot of speaking around gender equity as well. There certainly are still issues around kind of gender equity in the workplace, and I would encourage women especially to think about, just keeping aware of, there are issues around kind of essentially this concept of unconscious bias. Like, people make choices about how they treat coworkers, employees, what have you, based on things that they don't even realize that they're doing. And so really staying on top of and managing your career is even like a tiny bit more important for women, I would say. We have a lot of great data around that as well. There's a data package we have on PayScale around gender equity in the workplace. But what we found especially is typically what we're seeing is not that that women and men working in the exact same roles are making much different of a salary. What we're finding is that women tend to be in lower paying roles. So it's whether they're in different industries than men are, and men tend to be in higher paying industries like STEM, for example. And women also are underrepresented in more senior level roles. So, you know, it's remembering too to push a little bit harder for that promotion, or, you know, think about kind of your next step. The thing I would mention too on this slide is we just launched a campaign, hashtag #HeyPayScale on Twitter. So if you have a question you want to ask that wasn't answered here, or that we don't get to in kind of this Q&A section, or you think about later, you can always go on there, ask a question, use that hashtag, and somebody at PayScale will get back to you. Any questions I can help answer that I didn't cover?
What if your employer is in a different location and you can't like go in for a negotiation when you have your offer?
I mean, ideally, it's not great to do things, I would say, over email. So if you can manage to do some kind of like video conference, like Skype or FaceTime or what have you, that, I mean, it's always going to be better to be face to face, I think, in that situation. And I would say typically an employer is going to want to set it up that way as well. Or, you know, alternative is the phone. At least you're having kind of the conversation, rather than with email or kind of any written communication. Things can just get lost in translation. You can't really tell someone's body language or tone, and it's a little bit harder, I think. Anything else?
So now that's more like mission. So a job that's in a Christian ministry site, and then I really want a job, but I know that it's paying less than the market.
Yeah.
So how to find way to find middle ground?
I think the thing to do there, and certainly with mission-driven organizations, they're going to approach things in a slightly different way, right? They're probably going to say, hey, we can't compete, you know, with for-profit companies in this way, but here's what we do instead. And I think what you want to do there is ask questions about their philosophy around compensation. Like, okay, you know, I understand that this, you know, you're not going to be able to be as competitive as some other organizations, but can you help me understand kind of your pay philosophy? How do you set pay? Are there data sources you use to come to kind of a you know, range for a position? Are you willing to share with me what my range is so I can understand where I fall within it and how much room I have to grow? Are you willing to share the range above me? Like if I was moving into the next level, like what's that range? I think asking some questions around just pay philosophy and pay structure is something that more people should do. And it's not typical. It's not something that employees typically have asked in the past, but I think employers are starting to get more questions around that, because I think especially like the millennial generation pushed on that a bit more and said, hey, we believe in transparency kind of as a concept, which extends to pay as well. And we want to, you know, if you're telling me this is the range for the position, how did you get that? Like, where'd that come from? You know, not being disrespectful or being like, I don't believe it, you know, it's more of a like, curiosity. I think curiosity is your very best friend. If you ask questions in the same way that you would when you're in school, or you would if you were kind of doing research, you know, and you're coming at it with an approach that is genuine curiosity, it's going to come off, I think, well. And typically an employer that you'd want to work for would be willing to at least meet you halfway and try to get you to some comfort level with just understanding how they set pay.
A little while ago, you sort of gave an example of how you might go about asking for a salary negotiation. Could you do that again and maybe slow it down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the thing a few steps I would say, it's a little bit different between if it's a first offer or something that you're negotiating in a current role. In a current role, I would say, for sure, make sure that you never ambush your boss. You don't want to like walk into their office and demand to talk about your pay when you don't know what they're doing. They could be in the middle of a project. They could be, dealing with something personal. Who knows, right? So you always want to give a little bit of a heads up, like, hey, I would like to discuss my compensation. I'm wondering if we could set up a time to do that. So they have a little bit of time to prepare. You're both sitting down, feeling like you understand what the conversation's about. So I would say that's one caveat. In a negotiation that's a first offer, it's a little bit different. But once the kind of negotiation starts, obviously you want to have done your homework and you're walking in with a range in mind. But I would say that the thing to keep in mind, and it's not a script exactly, but it's essentially you want to keep in mind your tone. You always want to say thank you for an offer, even if it's not the offer you want. You want to come across as grateful for having gotten any offer, right? Like, thank you so much. That's really, I appreciate you making that offer. Can we discuss it? And I would just say, think of the ways that you can frame it that feel like a conversation, and you don't want to set it up in any way that feels combative. I think often with negotiation, people feel like they have to have a winner and a loser. Somebody won that negotiation. You don't ever want the employer to feel like they lost, right? Because how do they feel walking out of that room? Even if you got this great deal and this number you want, you still have to work with this person, right? So you do want to look at any negotiation you enter, I think, as a win-win. Like, how do I get the value that I need, and how does the company get the value out of me that they need and feel comfortable with the number that they're spending? So it's I think coming at it from a holistic approach like that is going to serve you well. And I would say there's Jim Hopkinson is. He has written a book about salary negotiation, has done some articles, and he actually contributed to our salary negotiation guide. He has this kind of formula that he talks about for salary negotiation where you essentially say, I have all of the qualifications that you're looking for in this particular role. Let me kind of outline them for you. But I also have this. Like, essentially, what can you do to differentiate yourself and say, I'm bringing to the table exactly what you've outlined that you need, and here's what else I can do for you that would bring value to the organization. Essentially, like, make them see how paying you a little bit more and getting you versus another candidate that they're thinking about is going to be a win for them. I would also say, if you've gotten to the point where you're talking about pay, typically they've decided, right? They want you. You are the person they're negotiating with. They're not negotiating pay with 3 different people and seeing who is going to come in at the right number and then hiring that person. That's typically not the way it goes. It's, oh my gosh, we found somebody that's great. Let's get this person in here. Let's have the pay conversation. So you do have more leverage than you think, I think, sometimes. You have leverage because they already decided they wanted you. You went through the interview process. On the other side of it, as somebody who has hired a lot of different people, it's a pain. Like, it takes time out of your day. You're having to, like, go scout people out. You're having to read all these resumes. You're having to bring people in and interview them. You're not doing your actual job. And you want a good person that is going to bring value to the organization, hit the ground running. Once you find that person, you're like, oh, hallelujah, right? So you don't want things to go badly in the pay discussion. So I do think, as long as you keep things on the rails and you're approaching the discussion from, whether they offered a number or they're asking you, shouldn't really matter because you've both done the work, right? So they could say, hey, I'm prepared to offer you blah amount for this position. Your response could be, that's great, could I have a little bit of time to think about that and get back to you by end of day or tomorrow or what have you. Sometimes it's good to take a break and just think about it. If you feel good in that moment that you have a little bit of room to negotiate, it could be that you say right then, thank you so much for this offer, I really appreciate that. I've done a little bit of work on my own, and I found the typical range for somebody with my, my background and for this position tends to be more here. Is that doable? And they may do the same thing where, let me think about that, like we go talk to some people, or they may say absolutely not. Anytime you get a no is data in my mind, so it's giving you information like, okay, they put up a stop sign, no, can't do that. That's your opportunity to ask more questions. That's where the curiosity cat comes back into play is, okay, you say you can't do an increase in the base pay. Can you help me understand that a little bit more? They may say, oh, we just don't have budget, whatever the reason is, you're getting some information. But that's also where you want to have your backup plan, right? Okay, if they're saying absolutely no on the base pay, what else can I ask for? Say, okay, I understand you can't do base pay increase. Can we talk about bonus? Is there a bonus plan? Do some, employees at the organization receive some type of annual bonus? Maybe we could talk about setting up some goals for that, and we could work that into my compensation plan. If that's a no, what's the next backup? Okay. Something else that's really valuable to me is my yoga class that I go to, but it starts at 4 o'clock. Could I get off at 4 o'clock every day? Have a little bit of wiggle room in my schedule, start earlier, get off later, whatever. You just have to think about like, what are the things that are going to be of value to you? And at what point does it stop being of value to you? At what point is they've gotten below a line of like, okay, they're offering me the space pay I'm not really fond of. They won't do a bonus. They won't wiggle on the benefits. Do I love this mission and this job so much that I am not willing to hold out a little bit longer and see what else is out there? And you also can definitely say, hey, I'm talking to some other employers and I really appreciate your offer. If you're not as concerned about kind of losing the opportunity, can I get back to you in a few days? Please let me know if anything changes, kind of thing, putting the pressure on them to be like, oh, like we could lose this person. Maybe they go back and have a conversation and come back to you. That could happen too, right? If they say, oh, this person might walk and they have other offers. Oh no, what does that mean? So, I never encourage people to play games. You want to make sure that whatever communication that you're giving them, you're willing to follow through on. You never want to dangle another offer if A, you don't have one, or B, you would be really upset if they walked away from the table because you're giving them that opening, right? So you just have to be really sure. There are people certainly in roles who will walk into their boss's office and say, oh, recruiters are calling me all the time and I have this other offer, you should pay me X amount more. And employers have absolutely said, okay, go take that job. That sounds like a really good role. And the person reacts as if, what? I don't want to go anywhere. And it's like, well, you open that door. So I would just say, game playing is never to your benefit. It's a tricky business. You could get into a situation where you didn't actually want the outcome that you end up getting. That was a really long-winded response to that, but anything else?
Are there certain circumstances when it's inappropriate to negotiate negotiated pay, like when you're receiving an initial offer?
I mean, unless they have said, I absolutely can't do anything different than what I'm putting on the table. I mean, even then, if you don't feel like it's a fair number, you could say, well, you know, okay, I understand that this is lower than I expected, honestly. Can I have some time to think? And again, like that might put a little bit of pressure on them. As you know, I would say there are rarely instances where it's inappropriate. The thing I would say is if you've done your research and you've figured out the range and someone's offering you above the range or at the super tippy top of the range, that might be the time that like just shut up and take it. Like don't negotiate. Like you got a really good deal. Like so you know I don't necessarily believe in the like you should always negotiate. Not if you've done the research and they're giving you this amazing offer. It's like you don't want to be ungrateful either and unreasonable and be like, well, I think I should make 10K more, and they'd be like, well, we're giving you way more than is typical. So you just, you want to be careful in that situation.
Especially for our age range, we're usually like pretty close to minimum wage right now.
Yep.
And so when minimum wage does increase, should we take that as the idea like, oh, the company already took a hit and we shouldn't ask for a raise, or should we take that as an opportunity to ask for it?
You know, that's a good question. There is this concept of wage compression that happens when the minimum wage increases. Essentially where, you know, if somebody that's absolutely at minimum wage is all of a sudden making more, what happens to the people right above them that have maybe greater responsibility and are all of a sudden making pretty much what the entry level people are making, or you know, somebody with less kind of skills. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's an opportunity to say, hey, you know, I know wages have adjusted. I'm just, you know, there's a way to bring it up, I think, in terms of like globally for the company, are you looking at kind of pay across the board in terms of what this means if kind of the minimum wage workers are getting a lift? What does this do to the people kind of the next step up, me being in that group? I think it's okay to raise the question, yeah. And again, you know, it will depend. Like if you know that your company is hurting because of that and is in a really bad place, you might wait a little bit, see how things shake out, make sure everybody's good, you know, before you bring that up. If you bring it up right when they're dealing with having to increase pay for, you know, a bunch of minimum wage workers, they might be like, oh my gosh, please, not right now, you know. So again, you know, it is timing. Like the person on the other side of the table, even though they're the company, they're a person, right? And it's like trying not to poke them too much when they're stressed is a good idea.
In interviews, if an employer asks you what amount you are looking for before they tell you the amount they're going to pay, what would you recommend? The
best non-answer to that question is I'm willing to consider any competitive offer. Then you don't have to say anything. But you know, if they really press you on kind of your salary expectations, again, you just want to be very clear on what the range for this role is. And I think, you know, you could also give a range, you know, or you could ask for slightly more than you feel comfortable with. Say, I've done my homework, you know, what I was looking at was this, you know, how does that sit? You know, does that work with kind of what you were considering in terms of budget? But yeah, I mean, as much as you can kind of not answer that question, and there are respectful ways to do it, right? Of just like, I'm willing to consider anything that's competitive. Anything else? Well, thank you for being such an attentive audience. And if you have additional questions after the fact, #PayScale, we will definitely make sure someone gets back to you.